My name's Carla. I'm 32. And tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Grandpa's charity gala. All glass and laughter. The kind of place where even the air smells expensive. People in black suits and diamond bracelets floated between tables. I stayed close to the back, holding my drink, trying not to look like I didn't belong. The spotlight shifted, and Grandpa raised his glass. His voice carried easily across the room. "Carla," he said, smiling. "How do you spend your $3.4 million trust fund these days?" The room stilled. Someone laughed too softly, too soon. Then silence, sharp as the clink of glass. My breath caught before I could move. The word million hung there like perfume gone sour. Across the table, my mother's smile cracked at the edges. My father adjusted his cufflinks. Neither met my eyes. I glanced around, faces turned. Curious, polite, hungry. Someone's phone camera glinted in the light. I blinked once, twice. What trust fund? It slipped out before I could stop it. The man beside me stopped mid-laugh. You could almost hear the room inhale. Grandpa's smile didn't change. He just looked past me, toward my parents. "Then tell me," he said quietly, "where did it go?" No one spoke. A waiter froze, holding a tray between us like a shield. The piano player missed a note and kept going. I felt my heart thudding somewhere near my throat. My fingers tightened around the glass. The stem felt thinner than it should. The glass in my hand caught the light. A thin line of gold trembling with it. I kept staring at it because it was easier than looking at anyone else. The bubbles climbed, slow and stubborn, like they didn't know the air had gone still. Grandpa's words hung over us, heavier than the chandeliers. My mother shifted in her seat, her ring tapping against the table tiny. Nervous sounds in the quiet. My father cleared his throat, the same way he used to before a lie. A waiter set down another tray of drinks, but no one touched them. My reflection wavered on the surface of the champagne, a blur of color and fear. I thought about setting the glass down, but my hand wouldn't move. The cold from the stem slipped into my palm and stayed there. People whispered little half-sentences floating between breaths. A woman near the bar smiled like she was watching a scene unfold, not a life unravel. The air felt too bright, too aware. Somewhere, the music started again, soft and awkward. I lifted the glass just enough to keep it steady. My wrist stiffened. My jaw did too. This time, I didn't argue. I just stood there, fingers locked around the glass, pretending it didn't feel like proof of everything I'd never known. The sound came back in fragments, the faint scrape of a chair, a cough somewhere near the back, the clink of a spoon against glass. Every noise felt distant, like it had to swim through thick air before reaching me. My hands still circled the champagne glass, its surface slick with condensation. I watched a single drop slide down, slow as if measuring time. The music changed to something softer, strings and low notes spilling into the room. People started talking again, careful, quiet, pretending nothing had happened. Their voices blended into a hum, steady and meaningless. I didn't move. The glass trembled once before I steadied it. The gold liquid inside had gone flat, bubbles dying against the rim. I stared at them, counting, just to have something small to hold onto. The stem pressed into my palm, a thin line of pressure that grounded me. A flash not from a camera, but from memory. A stage. My college graduation. I'd searched the crowd for their faces that day too. They'd waved from the back, clapping just long enough for a photo before leaving early for dinner reservations. I'd told myself they were proud. The air here smelled the same perfume, candle wax, the faint bite of money. My chest didn't hurt yet. It just felt hollow, like the room had taken my shape and left me outside of it. Someone laughed again, light and nervous, and the sound skimmed over me like wind against glass. I didn't look up. My thumb traced the rim of the glass until it squeaked. A small, steady sound I could control. Across the room, my parents whispered to a couple from the board, their faces already fixed back into charm. It hit me then it was never a joke to them. I placed the glass on the table, careful not to make a sound. My hand left a circle of moisture, faint and perfect, fading fast. Around it, reflections from the chandelier fractured into tiny pieces of light, glittering across the linen. For a second, I saw them like strangers at another table, a man and a woman protecting their comfort with practiced smiles. Someone called my name, maybe Grandpa, maybe no one. I didn't answer. The hum of voices stretched into a single note. I breathed once, slow and shallow, and let my shoulders fall. The light above flickered, caught the rim of the glass, and threw a thin line of gold across my wrist. That was the moment I stopped expecting them to see me. It wasn't the first time I'd been the quiet one in a room full of family noise. Years ago, at my sister's engagement party, they'd toasted to the daughter who made the right choices. I'd stood by the buffet, holding a paper plate that bent under the weight of cake I didn't want. Mom waved me over, only when the photographer asked for a family picture. I smiled on cue, then stepped out of frame before anyone noticed. I remember asking Dad once if I could borrow a small loan for my last semester of design school. He said, "You need to learn to manage what you have," while signing a check for my sister's Bali trip. I'd gone back to my apartment that night and drawn until morning, the hum of my laptop louder than the city outside. The next week, he mailed me a book on budgeting with a note, "Proud of you." I still have the envelope. The edges turned soft from being folded too many times. Mom was worse in quieter ways. Her words always dressed like compliments. "You have your father's work ethic," she'd say, "just not his results." She'd buy my sister new jewelry for confidence and tell me I looked better without distractions. Every time she said it, she touched her pearls like a habit. Once, an aunt from Chicago called after reading my first feature in a design magazine. She said, "They must be so proud of you." There was a pause on the line when I told her they hadn't mentioned it. She sighed, then laughed softly. "Well, I'm proud for them." That call lasted 6 minutes. I still remember her voice steady, kind, like someone holding the weight for me just a little. The kindness never stayed long, but it left marks, small and bright. Now, standing in that bright room with the glass still cold in my hand, I can see the pattern like lines on a map. It was never random. It was built, year after year, by the small ways they reminded me where I belonged, close enough to serve the story, far enough to never touch its center. I think about the birthday dinners where my name came last on the cake, the calls that began with "How's work?" and ended before I could answer. I used to wait for their pride, like waiting for mail that never arrived. At some point, I stopped checking the box. The envelope from Dad's old note sits in my desk drawer now. The paper is thin, translucent, where my thumb wore it down. Every time I see it, I remember that I used to believe love was something you earned. That night at the gala showed me what it really cost. Madison, my roommate, once told me, "You don't have to prove anything to people who choose not to see." I laughed then, but her words came back while I watched my parents talk to strangers as if nothing had cracked. Nothing ever changed. Only I did. I reached for my bag under the chair, the zipper catching on the strap. Inside, my sketchbook brushed against my hand. Its cover was worn, the corner bent from years of being carried everywhere. I closed my fingers around it. When I looked up, the chandelier lights flickered, and for a brief second, the gold reflections faded from the table. It felt like a room taking a breath, holding it, before something inevitable shifted. That night, the city felt quieter than usual. The fog hung low over the bridge lights, and everything outside my window looked blurred, like the world was still deciding what to be. I sat on the couch with the envelope from Dad in my lap, the one I'd kept through too many moves. The paper was soft, worn thin at the corners. I unfolded it once, just to see the word "proud" again. It didn't sting anymore, it just sounded empty. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Madison. "You okay?" Then another. "You don't owe them gratitude for surviving." I read it twice. It stayed on the screen longer than it needed to. The apartment was dark except for the small lamp near the sink. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else has stopped. My sketchbook sat open beside me. I traced a half-finished logo from a job I'd never been paid for. My own handwriting looked unfamiliar, steady, but tired. I thought about Grandpa's face at the gala. Calm, sharp, not surprised. He'd known, maybe longer than I had. The trust fund, the missing money. It wasn't just numbers. It was every time I'd swallowed disappointment and called it patience. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling until the plaster lines blurred. The weight in my chest didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like gravity. I stood up and turned on the kitchen light. The yellow glow made the whole place look smaller but warmer, like the first place that actually belonged to me. I pulled my laptop closer and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked. Waiting. I typed the words "Portfolio Update" in the header. Simple. Quiet. A beginning. Outside. A car passed, its headlights cutting across the window blinds. I gathered the sketches scattered on the table, projects I'd abandoned when I still thought my family might notice. One by one, I clipped them into a folder. The motion steadied my breathing. Madison came out of her room, sleepy, hair tied up. She leaned on the doorframe. "Starting something?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice low. "Something mine." She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need words, and went back to bed. I filled out an application form for a small design studio downtown. Nothing fancy, just honest work. When I hit send, it didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like exhale. The lamp flickered once before, holding steady. I looked at the old envelope one last time, then folded it neatly and slid it into the trash. The sound it made was barely anything, but it filled the room. That night, I began writing my own story. 6 months passed before I realized how much had changed. The mornings came earlier now, coffee before sunrise, laptop open by 6. The desk by the window became my new rhythm. I designed logos for small cafes, indie brands, anyone willing to take a chance on someone rebuilding from scratch. No noise, no audience, just steady work and quiet breath. The first client, who paid on time, sent a message that said, "You made our dream look real." I stared at it longer than I meant to. It wasn't about the money. It was the first time someone had trusted me to build, not just survive. By spring, I was renting a small studio in the Mission District. The walls smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. Madison helped me move in, stacking boxes labeled "Dreams and Receipts" in her messy handwriting. She left a keychain on the counter, a tiny brass sun. "For light," she said, grinning. At night, I worked under a single lamp, music low. I'd pin new drafts to the wall, circle notes in red, fix fonts until dawn. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt alive. The hum of my computer, the scratch of my pen, the smell of ink they built, a kind of peace I hadn't known before. A few months later, my portfolio was full. One of Grandpa's friends, a venture partner, saw my work online. He asked if I'd consider rebranding one of their tech firms. The contract came with a handshake, not a lecture. When I signed it, my hand didn't shake at all. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor of my studio. Boxes still half unpacked, the brass sun glinted under the lamp. The silence around me wasn't lonely anymore. It was earned. By the end of that first year, I'd stopped keeping count of clients or invoices. What stayed with me were the small things: the smell of new paper each morning, the light shifting across the studio walls, the calm that came from knowing no one could take this from me. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, a reflex from years of waiting for their calls. It never rang, and I learned to like the silence. There was power in it, not punishment. One afternoon, while reviewing a draft, I caught my reflection in the screen, shoulders relaxed, eyes clear. That was when it hit me. I didn't need to prove I was worthy of belonging. I already belonged here. Madison joked that I'd become a morning person with boundaries. We laughed, but she was right. I turned down projects that didn't feel right, mentored a few new designers, even volunteered to teach branding basics at a local art center. Watching students light up when their work came together, it healed something I didn't know was still sore. Then, almost by accident, I drove past the old neighborhood. The streets were narrower than I remembered. The gate to my parents' house was closed, ivy climbing over the stone. I didn't stop. I just watched the light fade over the roofline, the same way the past had faded, still there, but harmless now. When I got home, the city was wrapped in fog again. My studio lights glowed through it, soft and steady, like a promise kept. I hung the brass sun by the window and sat for a while, listening to the hum of the traffic below. Peace doesn't announce itself, it just stays. A year later, I was invited to a design conference downtown, one of those glass-walled spaces filled with light, laughter, and quiet ambition. My studio had been featured in a local magazine for independent creators, and they wanted me to speak on a panel about building honest brands. The irony wasn't lost on me. The stage lights were softer than I expected, warm and forgiving. Rows of people filled the seats, the hum of conversation pulsing through the air. When I stepped onto the platform, a flash of red caught my eye near the front row. My mother's scarf. My father beside her, straight-backed. Older, they'd come with a sponsor group, not knowing I was on the list. For a second, the sound fell away. Just them and me. The same silence we'd shared over too many dinners. I held their gaze long enough to feel the weight shift recognition, then discomfort. My mother looked down first. My father adjusted his tie. The host introduced me. Carla Hart, founder of Hart Studio, a creative firm redefining trust through design. Applause. It filled the room in a way I'd never imagined hearing my name before. I spoke about process, about light and story and starting small. No big gestures, just truth. People listened, took notes, cameras clicked. Not the kind that judged, but the kind that remembered. When I stepped off the stage, the host leaned over and whispered, "You made that sound like poetry." I smiled. Maybe it was. After the panel ended, people came up to shake my hand. Business cards exchanged like small promises. I thanked them, smiled, let the noise roll around me. From across the room, I saw my parents still seated. They didn't approach. Mom's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her program. Dad's jaw worked like he had something to say but couldn't find the right language. I walked past them, slow and steady, the applause still echoing faintly in the glass walls. As I reached the doors, I turned just enough to see their faces one last time. They looked smaller than I remembered, framed by the brightness of the stage lights that no longer belonged to them. Outside, the afternoon sun caught on the windows of nearby buildings, scattering light in every direction. I stood for a moment, breathing it in the air, sharp and alive, the kind that fills the lungs and makes space where heaviness used to sit. The city moved around me, indifferent and beautiful, somewhere. A photographer called my name for a picture. I turned toward the light, not the sound. Peace, I realized, doesn't need witnesses. I walked away without looking back.